Chapter 5.
Both of you, shut up.
Tullen and Curlin, Master of Bulk, looked over angrily at the Grandmaster. You might be the Grandmaster, Tullen said coolly, but you have no right to address us as if we were your servants.
I have the right to address you any way I might please,
Zeril Iwine replied haughtily.
You are in my city, and both of you, in fact all four of you, should remember that I do know certain things about you that would best not be known to others.
Tullen shifted uneasily. Zeril smiled inwardly. Tullen was a coward who could always be intimidated. If you're referring to the massacre of Turquoise, you were the instigator of that, Curlin replied smoothly, the rings on her bony fingers flashing in the lamplight. She looked up at him with a cool disdain, leaning heavily on her staff for support. Her face was always disturbing to Zeril, for it was the face of death, the face of a fighter who had extended her life through the use of spells to the very edge until flesh and bone were held together by the slenderest of threads. Her skin was yellowed, like old rotting parchment, and hung from her skull in loose, wrinkled folds, as if it were about to peel away in corruption. There was always a faint smell to her, the smell of moldering graves, decay, and darkness. Zeril looked at the Brown Master coldly.
But I am the Grandmaster, and I did it at the behest of Kuthaman. As for the four of you, no one knows of your parts.
So go on and tell the mob. I don't give a damn, Curlin cackled. Besides, it's ancient history now, and those idiots on the streets don't give a copper. All they care about is what will happen in the next festival, so don't threaten us with that old line.
Did your man break the rules of Akarak? Zeril asked, deciding it was best to shift ground.
Does it matter? She wasn't even a fighter, just a mere warrior, a Benelish woman at that.
Duels of magic are supposedly forbidden here, the Grandmaster snapped angrily. But Akarak is legal and the mob expects the rules to be observed.
Are you ruled by the mob? Tullen sniffed.
No, damn you, but I've got 500,000 people living in this city and at least another million pouring in for the festival. If they riot, it's my property that's damaged, my taxpayers who go and get themselves killed. Akarak, at least, keeps them entertained until the festival, but if it gets out of hand, next thing you know, fighters are using magic spells on the street and things get ugly.
I'll run an inquest into this, if that will make you happy, Curlin finally replied in a bored tone. Witnesses have to be found and questioned. The Benelish woman has disappeared, and so has your one-eye. The Brown Master looked over with a smirk at Tullen. Your people murdered him, and I expect compensation, Tullen snarled back. He was one of my best, easily 8th rank, and a score of your fighters ganged up on him. We couldn't even find the fragments of his body. Tullen looked back sharply at Zeril. You're worried about Akarak rules and ignore the fact that one of my best fighters was attacked viciously and murdered. He was on our property. He cheated one of my 9th ranks, and worse yet, that man's satchel was stolen. If he's still a man. Damn you, I want compensation, Curlin roared. My house is damaged, 4 men and a woman fighter dead, damaged or simply devoured so that no spell could revive them, and another score are injured. Nearly a dozen satchels are missing as well, including Naru's, one of my best fighters. You started it, Tullen cried angrily, slamming the table before him with his beefy fist. I lost 8 dead and 30 injured, and satchels as well. Compensate, or by the Eternal, I'll burn your house to the ground.
Both of you are under injunction,
Zeril shouted. The 2 housemasters looked over coldly at the Grandmaster. No one is to step foot into the street until the beginning of festival. Anyone leaving your houses will be arrested, their spells stripped from them, and barred from festival. Try to take my people's spells, and you'll have a war, Curlin snapped, and Tullen nodded in agreement, as if the Brown Master was now his closest friend and under attack. We'll withdraw from festival, Tullen announced, and Curlin looked over at her enemy, who suddenly nodded in agreement. If we boycott, you won't have festival, and you won't earn a thin copper on the betting. With that, Tullen snapped his fingers at the Grandmaster and laughed. Zeril looked back and forth at the 2, sputtering, unable to speak for a moment, the 2 moving closer to each other as if all past hatreds were now forgotten.
Get out, both of you. Get out, and so help me, if there's another instant my fighters are ordered to kill on sight. Now get out!
The 2 walked out of the room together, though as soon as they cleared the doorway, they fell back into bitter recriminations against each other. Zeril watched them go, his face purple with anger. Storming over to his desk, he picked up a small bell and rang it. Seconds later, a diminutive, hunched-over form appeared in the still-open doorway.
Get in here, damn you.
Araya walked slowly into the room, head bent low.
You approached Tullen last night, didn't you?
As you ordered, master.
And?
I offered him 100 gold for the head of One Eye. He didn't even have to turn him over, simply send him out the front door after dark and we'd take care of the rest.
And his response?
He laughed and told me to get out.
But did he seem willing?
Araya nodded. I think he was seriously considering it.
So what happened this morning?
Master, he must have slipped out of a secret entry. You know that as quickly as we find one, they go and make another. Beneath the houses there is a warren of tunnels, and a watch could not be kept on all that we know, let alone all that we don't know.
What else did you find?
I've sent our inquiries. The Baron of Gish arrives the night before festival, and I shall make sure he's asked if he knows of any fighter who claims to come from his land. All we know about One Eye is that he arrived in the city 2 nights ago, fought an orange and killed him, disappeared with a pickpocket, and then appeared at the door of the House of Kessler the following morning.
Zeril sat silent for a moment. The pickpocket. Do we know who he is?
Hammond is his street name, one of the heads of the brotherhoods that control the vice and crime in the city. He's well thought of and has connections.
Obviously not so well thought of you couldn't find a traitor.
Money always talks with that sort.
How did this Hammond fall in with One Eye?
The pickpocket was mastering the fight.
Zeril cursed softly, annoyed at what was an infringement upon his rights, even if it was by a lowly scum out to make a few coppers. Mastering the fights was the sole prerogative of the Grandmaster. Even in the old days of Kuthamon, and before him, the role of the fight master was an honored position. Now pickpockets were presuming to the right. Where are they now?
They were last seen during the fight this morning, and then disappeared, the same as the Benalish woman. It's believed the 3 were killed in the fight, and the remains devoured or blasted apart.
Too much of a coincidence that all 3 would disappear into death like that. I want more inquiries run. Start with the pickpocket. Send some warriors and fighters to track down his lair. He must have accomplices. Use the usual methods.
Yes, master.
Remember, Araya, either the Grey or you will join the Walker for some entertainment, so do your job. Close and bolt the door on the way out.
Trembling, Araya withdrew from the room. Zeril sat in silence for a moment, looking down at his beefy hands, which were folded over his more than ample waist. What to do? Again, this morning there was the sensing. It had hit him with a terrible urgency when he had first laid eyes upon the One Eye. Now this morning it had come again, when he had first ridden out into the plaza to put down the fighting. There was a sensing that something terrible was lurking, and for a moment he thought he had found it. And the sensing had drifted away. On the eve of festival, far too much was going wrong. The tension had been building for years, he thought, under Kuthamon, especially in the final years of his quest to pierce the veil between worlds. All had lived in fear of him and his power. After he had become a walker, all still feared him even more so, and yet he was present but for 1 day of the year. The old balance of power between the fighting houses and the Grandmaster had been a finely tuned one. The Grandmaster was not as powerful as the combined might of the houses, but the houses, by the very nature of their competitiveness, would never unite against him. In turn, he had to keep a semblance of order in the land so that the mana would grow and to prevent chaos. Now it was shifting. The houses were becoming increasingly competitive with each other, and against the Grandmaster there was an increasing defiance. Zeril sensed that by the very nature of the system he had created, the increasing bloodiness of the festival to satiate the mob and generate even more betting had helped to create this. Yet the increasing number of death fights in the arena served as well to keep the power of the houses down, since each year they lost more and yet more fighters in the fights, thereby sapping their strength. There was the other dark dream as well, that ever so slowly he could hoard his own mana, and in the process, one day do as Kuthamon had done and become a walker in his own right. That was the dark secret, for he knew with a grim certainty that if Kuthamon ever truly understood that part of the plan, he would kill him out of hand and replace him with a new Grandmaster. It was a numbing game of plans within plans, the striking of a balance, the keeping of the Housemasters off guard, the gathering of the mana tribute for the Grandmaster, and above all else, survival. Somehow he could sense that this One Eye had become a wild card in the deck of the game. It would have to be addressed. Though he dreaded the thought of it, Zeril now realized that Kuthamon would have to be summoned and told, if only as precaution, and with the hope that he might even know the answer. Sighing, he finally stood up and walked across the room, stopping before what looked like nothing more than a paneled wall. He raised his hand, and the wall slipped back, revealing a small room within. Zeril walked into the middle of the room, stepping into a circle traced in gold, which shone brightly against the jet-black rock, though there was no torch or lamp present. The hidden door closed behind Zeril, and he lowered his head, his hand slipping into his satchel, clutching the bundles of mana of all the colors of the rainbow. Shafts of light began to swirl around him, coiling and twisting, rising up in a cone around him. He waited long minutes in silence, his eyes closed against the brilliance of the unearthly light that bathed him. Finally, he sensed the presence coming, as if it were an avalanche racing down the side of a mountain. Zeril Ewine, Grandmaster of the Arena and High Baron of the city of Kush, fell to his knees. The Walker was before him.
"Why summon me?"
The voice whispered, filled with annoyance at what might be rage.
"Festival is still 3 days away, and I have other things to concern me now."
"It was necessary, my lord," Zeril whispered.
"You are but one of 100 domains, 100 planes of existence. I have better things to attend to other than your grovelings. This had better not be frivolous."
"I don't think it is."
"Speak, and be quick."
Zeril, in a hurried tone, told him of Garth One-Eye and the fighting that seemed to follow in his wake. The Walker was silent except for the crackling of energy which reverberated like a bell through the room, so that Zeril wanted to cover his eyes but dared not.
"The reports are that he is dead, but I think not. I think he's still alive."
"So search for him. Why bother me? Surely you don't expect me to track down this insect."
"No, my great lord, but I have a concern."
"Speak it then, damn you."
"There is something behind this man. I know not what, but it is there. For a brief instant I thought I saw him in the confusion of the riot, but then he wasn't there and I rode on. If that is so, he has powers. I thought long on this, and then the connection came. It came to someone else from long ago who had mastery of such a spell, and you know of whom I speak."
Zeril sensed a brief instant of hesitation on the part of the Walker.
"If that is so, then find him."
"I thought, great lord, that—"
"Find him and kill him now. I have no time for this. I have other concerns beyond your miserable plane. I will be back for festival, and I expect this to be resolved."
"My great lord."
But the presence was already gone, and Zeril sensed that somehow there was a great urgency to his departure, as if a struggle was taking place even as they spoke, and that the Walker could not spare a second longer for what to him was a trivial concern. Exhausted, Zeril sat down in the middle of the circle and opened his eyes, the only light in the room coming from the gold circle which circumscribed him. He had known but brief glimpses into the realms of his lord and master the Walker, and knew it was, as were all places, a domain of wars and struggle against others of the highest power. The glimpses were chilling in their terror and yet seductive in their power. For a fighter could, if he survived long enough, become one day a Walker. He could become capable of leaping beyond the myriad planes of existence. In such realms he could gather in mana undreamed of, the foundation of the power of all spells and artifacts. In such realms he could in fact become immortal and exist for countless aeons until he was at last cast down by another Walker who finally managed to steal his mana. There was only so much mana in the realm of planes, even though they were rumored to be uncountable. Therefore a Walker did not care too much for emerging rivals. Zeril sighed. It was the dream of immortality that was all so seductive. As a wielder of magics, he had the ability to extend his own lifespan significantly, to a millennium or more. But each extension came with a price, and one did slowly age, until finally the power to extend was nothing more than the insane act of senile old fools who were good for nothing more than sitting in dark shadows and drifting in a world of impotent dreams. His most implacable foe, Curlin of Brown, was already becoming such a person, terrified of death and equally terrified of the final lingering. He knew her dream was to destroy him, to become a Grandmaster and thus gather enough power to try for immortality. The mere thought of her and her constant plotting aroused a desire yet again to find a means somehow to quietly kill her. What might she do with this One-Eye, and what was his plan in all this? For it was obvious that he must have a plan. The One-Eye was alive and had to be found. It was evident that his game was indeed dangerous to the existing order of things, and if the existing order of things was disturbed, then the Walker would be disturbed. If the walker was sufficiently disturbed, a new Grandmaster could always be found, and Zeril realized with a cold certainty that he had to find One Eye before Curlin got to him first. Enter. Garth One Eye walked calmly into the inner office of the master of the House of Inkara, Jamak Ravelth. The housemaster looked up, his waspish, angular face chiseled by the glare of a single lamp that flickered on the table behind which he sat. The table was strewn with shimmering objects, and as Garth drew closer, he saw that they were stacks of gold coins, emeralds, blood-red rubies, opals the size of cat's eyes, multifaceted diamonds that seemed to explode with light, and cunningly wrought artifacts of metals unknown to this plane of existence. Jamak looked up at him and smiled, his bloodless lips pulling back so that his face looked like a skull. "My toys," Jamak said softly, motioning for Garth to come forward and admire them. The gesture seemed friendly, and yet as Garth approached, he could sense a barrier go up, Jamak leaning forward slightly as if to fling his body over his possessions in order to shield them from the lascivious looks of others. Garth scanned them, pausing for a moment on the artifacts, and then he shrugged his shoulders as if he was looking at nothing more than pathetic trinkets that a beggar was trying to sell in exchange for a few coppers.
"They're of no concern to me,"
Garth said evenly.
"That's what some might say, even as they connive to rob me," Jamak replied sharply.
"I'm interested in other things."
"Such as?"
"Power and revenge."
"And both can bring you gold."
"No,"
Garth said coldly.
"The payment is in here,"
and he pointed toward his heart with a clenched fist.
"Does it concern the eye, is that it?"
Jamak asked, licking his bloodless lips with a bloodless tongue. Garth lifted the black patch that covered his eye, and, seized with a perverted curiosity, Jamak held the lamp up to look closely, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps.
"It looks like it was gouged out, not just cut in a fight. Messy, very messy."
He licked his lips again. Garth lowered the flap.
"Works well with women. They recoil at the sight of it,"
Garth said coldly.
"Women, who needs them when one has this?"
said Jamak, scooping up a ruby and rubbing it lovingly with his claw-like hands.
"The wound has ached for 5 years. 5 years I have gone to sleep with the memory of the pain. For 5 years I have awakened at dawn, the empty socket filled with agony."
"Who did it?"
Garth hesitated for a moment.
"Go on."
"The Grandmaster, and Leonovit, the cousin of Curlin, Master of Bulk."
Jamak cackled softly.
My, our vengeance does aim high."
"It was several moons after Festival 5 years ago. Leonovit and I fought. He had taken my sister against her will. When I started to best him, several of his groveling fighters jumped me from behind. I was taken to the Grandmaster and charged with breaking the peace, and as punishment my eye was taken, my satchel stripped, and I was driven out."
"So now you've come back for revenge?"
"Something like that."
"Why didn't anyone remember you today? Naro had served the House of Bulk for decades."
"Do you remember the number of first-rank fighters who are Hanan without house, whom you have destroyed or maimed in your time?"
Jamak chuckled softly.
"They're like noisome flies."
"I'm forgotten, but I have not forgotten."
"So why me?"
"Why not? I know you like these things."
Garth pointed at the treasure strewn across the table.
"I can earn you more. I can earn you more in the arena. I can earn you more in commissions once Festival is done, and I can bring damage to a rival house. I've already done that for you today."
"You betrayed Tullin and the House of Kestha."
"That fat pig?"
Garth snorted with disdain.
Jamak looked up at Garth. "He is a fellow housemaster. I should cut your tongue out for that."
"And if you did and offered it to him, he'd devour it uncooked. He is a pig. A man without breeding. Disgusting."
Jamak leaned back in his chair, and a thin, reedy chuckle escaped him. Garth reached into his tunic, pulled out a small leather bag, and tossed it on the table. Jamak stared at it for a moment, and then eagerly tore the pouch open. He drew out a single ruby and held it near the lamplight, studying it intently. As long as I have the shelter of this house and can wear its livery, I have no need for such things. Consider it an offering of respect, a payment to the pension fund for aging fighters who refuse to get themselves killed and out of the way. I should add I do have more, but they are hidden away in a place I alone know. If things work out well, they can be added to the fund in due time. Jamak, not even bothering to look at Garth, simply nodded his head, his attention still focused on the ruby. Exquisite, flawless.
Are we agreed then?
Yes, Jamak said absently. For the pension fund, you can be initiated on the morning of festival. He quickly looked up. You said you have more. Garth nodded, and Jamak, smiling, returned to his examination of the gem. Garth waited for a moment, but Jamak said nothing more. Bowing low, Garth withdrew from the room, closing the door behind him. The last sight of the housemaster was of him still bent over the lamp, studying the ruby as if it were a book of arcane knowledge containing spells yet unheard of.
Master!
Garth turned and saw Hammond, lingering in the shadows. Motioning for him to come over, Hammond pulled Garth into the alcove where he had been waiting. While you were resting earlier, I decided to take a little walk.
Fleshpot hunting now that we have money?
No, damn it, back to my home. I felt the need to get a little information. After all, I do have a brotherhood to run, even while I'm out getting in trouble with you. Also, I had this sudden feeling that something terrible had happened.
What?
Hammond looked away for a moment, his fists clenching and unclenching, and then he looked back up, his rheumy eyes clouded with tears. They're all dead. All of them. Dead.
What happened?
The Grandmaster. I should have known better. Somehow I sensed something was wrong when I hit the alley. It was too quiet, as if even the rats had gone into hiding. The door was ajar and I went in. They were all dead. Rico, Matu, Evanuel, old Legolas Nahatkim, all of them dead, my other brothers gone. I hoped they escaped, but somehow I know they didn't and were taken. Those they left behind were tortured and their heads cut off and...
You were chased?
Hammond nodded. Someone came in the door behind me. I darted to the back of our shack going down our sewer hole.
I can smell that.
I made my way back here, but I think they followed me. I tried to lose them in the sewers. I finally had to come back here, coming out where I knew there was an entry into this house. They were closing in. Garth nodded slowly. Damn you. Why did you come back? Hammond snarled angrily. Garth looked around and pulled Hammond deeper into the alcove.
I don't know what you mean,
Garth whispered. You know damn well what I mean. My friends, all of them dead because of you.
You're mistaken. I don't know what you're talking about,
Garth said quietly.
But let me ask this. You've lost friends before, haven't you?
Hammond looked up at Garth, the tears streaking down his filthy cheeks, tracing twin lines of white. Yes. Long ago. Another life. I tried to forget. They went to the land of the dead, where I thought they would all stay. He looked up angrily at Garth.
None of us can forget.
And now they're dead. Garth reached out and put a gentle hand on Hammond's shoulder.
Believe me, Hammond, if I had known your friends were in danger, I would have done something. I didn't think the arm of the Grandmaster would reach that far. Something is pushing him, and he is acting. I expected that, but not that he would reach toward you.
Through me, he reached you nevertheless.
I think something needs to be done,
Garth said coldly, and grabbing hold of Hammond, he started down the long corridor.
The pot needs to be stirred more.
What do you mean he's alive? Tullen spit out the half-chewed hunk of boiled squid he had been working on and picked up a goblet of wine. Just that, Ariah said quietly. He's alive. Impossible. Brown claims they killed him, and several of my people saw him explode in a cloud of green smoke. Could the smoke not have been a masking spell? Tullen tossed down the wine and slammed the goblet on the table, the fine crystalline stem shattering. We spotted his servant, who is reported dead as well. If he is alive, then I think that until we find a body, we must assume that One Eye is alive. Tullen tossed the broken goblet to the floor, cursing as he sucked on a cut to his grease-coated finger. Then if he's alive, where is he? We think with Jamak. Purple, those low-born scum? Tullen roared with laughter and slapped his thigh. I'd sooner cut my own throat, or worse yet, starve to death before I go to those maggot-born scum. Nevertheless, we think he's there. Tullen suddenly grew serious. Why? He asked softly as if talking to himself. Precisely. I think it's safe to assume you wouldn't have punished him for what happened today. Rather, you'd reward him. Damn right. 1 against 12. And on top of that, rearranging Naru's jewels the way he did. Damn, he'll be a wonder in the arena. But he deserted you. You gave him shelter, removed from him the onus of being a Hanin, and this is how he pays you back. Tullen nodded meditatively. So what is his game? Araya asked. Tullen looked across the table at the diminutive servant of the Grandmaster. You figure it out. Now get out. I think you know that there's a price of 500 gold on his head if it is brought in not attached to his body. Bring him in alive and stripped of his powers and the price is doubled. That's far more than you'd make in an open wager on him in the arena. Is that a bribe offer? No, just a straightforward business arrangement. He's no longer of your house, so he's fair game. If you should kill him, the money's yours. I thought there was an injunction against members of one house killing another in the city except in the festival arena. Araya nodded as if presented with a serious dilemma. Rules as always can be bent. The Walker, I suspect, would not be amused to hear that. He is somewhere else, Araya said, his voice suddenly nervous, and we are here, and what is not said when he arrives is of no concern. Araya paused for a moment. And do remember, this One-Eye has humiliated you. He wore your colors and then shucked them off for another. Would you let it be said one of your fighters could walk away, thus without consequences? Araya's words struck home, and Tullen brought his fist down on the table, sending a bowl of boiled squid flying end over end, the squid splashing out onto the table and floor. Have your money ready. I expect to collect it. The question is, as long as I bring him in, will any questions be asked about my methods? None. Then have the money ready by festival morning.